Water.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. A couple of administrative announcements first. Coffee and water over here to your left. Bathrooms are out the doors and down the hall. And in case of an emergency, our exits are right there and right here. So just keep that in mind. My name is Bill Krause. I volunteer with the Crete Emergency Management Agency. The agency is responsible for responding to incidents and planning and preparing for any kind of emergencies that might be experienced in the village. We do things as, I'll call it menial, as directing traffic, but that can really be a challenging task at times because a lot of drivers don't pay attention. And that's how we end up out there helping the fire department to search and rescue and assisting other village agencies in what they need to do. Particularly the fire department is usually the one that we assist the most. I've been in the village about a year now and volunteering with the EMA since last October. Directors back in the back, Marty Brexio and Steve Bodwin is another volunteer with the agency. So welcome, thanks for coming out. Briefing tonight, the training is about being prepared for an emergency. September is National Preparedness Month, so good timing on our part here for this, and hope you get something out of it. I stole this title, I didn't make that up, but I loved it. Be your own hero. Don't rely on anybody else, don't rely on the government to fix whatever you might think you need in the event of an emergency. So this is designed to at least give you a starting point to do that. So, the disaster, would you rather be in this situation, cold hard floor of a rec center somewhere eating stale peanut butter and crackers with lots of other people? Or would you rather be in your own house, maybe without power, but on your couch eating fresher food? I think everybody would probably be in agreement that the second option is a little better. So why? Why are we going to prepare? Well, things happen quickly in an emergency. Not always predictable. Some things are, certainly. Maybe floods are coming. Okay, that's something that can be predictable. But tornadoes strike without warning. And this is not just weather related, but those seem to be the largest and most common hazards in northeastern Illinois anyway. But we have a very busy train track running right through the center of the village. And it's been several years since a derailment, I guess. Do you remember, Steve?
I don't, but Marty's, or Mike.
Okay. But that may also constitute an emergency where people need to be prepared to either stay in homes or leave quickly. As I just mentioned, being forced to leave. You may not want to, but you need to be prepared to in case that is the order given. Of course, we had a power outage, around July 4th or so, that affected some people I know for 4 or 5 days. I felt pretty fortunate. Ours was out for about 12 or 14 hours. But if that happens, you need to be prepared to function without some of the basic services that you're used to having all the time. And yes, be your own hero. The government can only do so much. I work for the federal government full time, and I've seen budget issues becoming more and more prevalent every year. This year's no different. Likely next year we'll be functioning with even less money. I'm sure the village and county are kind of under the same restraints. There's only so much you can do. Resilience is a big kind of buzzword in the emergency management community. Resilience means getting back to the way things were before the incident happened. So by preparing yourself ahead of time you make yourself and thus your community better prepared to get things back to whatever was normal before the incident happened. So what could happen up there? I mean, obviously, like I mentioned, weather is a significant hazard in Illinois, Indiana, this whole area. And we've seen a lot of these things recently, the tornadoes in Washington, Illinois, flooding happening all the time. I guess last April, before I moved here, it was pretty bad for a lot of the state. Earthquakes I'll talk about, that's not really weather, but Illinois is located near two or on two seismic zones, if you're not familiar. One is the New Madrid seismic zone down near St. Louis, Memphis area. The other one is the Wabash seismic zone, which runs along the Wabash River in Indiana. But thinking is, if the New Madrid, which is supposedly overdue, happens, that will trigger the Wabash, and it may not affect us here with shaking, but what it's going to do is cut off a lot of things that we need to function. Gas, perhaps electricity. A lot of roads may be closed that bring things into the Chicago area. So how are those things going to get here? And when I say things we need: food, fuel, the basics. So that could be an issue sometime in the future. You know, it's not pleasant always to think about them, but better to think about it now than after it happens. Hazmat release, like I mentioned, I think about that here, particularly with the train tracks. There's also potential for a nuclear plant incident. I think there's one directly east of here, about 50 miles or so, which puts us kind of on the edge of really serious problems, but that could be an issue. We saw what happened in Japan several years ago. Power outages, infectious disease. That's kind of been in the news lately too, with what's going on in Western Africa with Ebola. So we might not get that here, but we do get other things. So just some things to think about. Anything else? Anyone have some thoughts running through their mind about, well, what about that? No? Okay.
Terrorism?
Terrorism, sure, I'd almost put that back with, yeah, I think personally that hazmat release could be due to terrorism incident. So any other terrorist type of incident would have a very short effect, I think. These tend to be longer lasting things.
Basically anything that could cause a mass exodus out of Chicago.
Right.
Riots, whatever.
Which way are they going?
Yeah.
You know, north, west, and south. So, and we're right in that path. So how do we prepare? Well, get or make a kit. You can buy a kit, and I'll talk about kits in much more detail. Making one is much cheaper, and you can tailor it for whatever you need it to do. Make a plan, and I'll talk about plans in some more detail too. And really practice it. You can have a plan, but if you don't practice, in an incident when you're trying to take care of yourself, your family, or evacuate, you're not going to be thinking about a lot of these things. So if they're all put together and you've practiced it already, it should go much more smoothly. Again, these are just tips. Emergency kit. Recommendation is to have a small kit in your vehicle. And I'll talk about what goes in it. Airtight. Food and water need to be replaced on a regular basis. You need to look at it every once in a while and make sure, okay, do I really need that? Or is there something new I think I might need to add to it? And some kind of container to use. I like the I like these, the Pelican boxes. They can be a little expensive though, but they're watertight, they're airproof, so. But one like that is probably 3 feet wide and runs about $450 or so, $450, but they last. So, what do you need in your kit? Like I mentioned before, fresh water, food, clean air, and I'll talk about that in more detail too, and warmth. Especially, supposedly this winter's gonna be a nice cold one too, just like last. You may have to improvise. Bare minimum is 3 days, and I've actually seen a lot of the literature and recommendations upping that. For 3 days, my recommendation would be something that you grab to go. And, cause you can probably get somewhere within 3 days, that has the food and water that you need. If you're gonna stay home, that's a different story. So, recommendation is 2 kits. A large one that stays home, smaller ones to go. Or a bug out bag. I don't know if anybody's heard that term used before, but that's kind of a popular term. What are you gonna put in? These are recommendations again.
Bill,
Yes, sir.
could you explain what a bug out bag is?
Well, sure. Let me back up. Really, it's a slang term for the definition here, a lightweight, small kit that you can just grab and go. Make sense? I stole this stuff, a lot of this stuff from the internet. Battery powered, actually we were talking about this the other night. I'd probably go with something that's a hand crank. They make a lot of really good equipment now that you can power with a hand crank. Lights, radios, probably even televisions. Get a NOAA weather radio. The EMA has them on sale. The Village has them on sale, sponsored by EMA, I guess. So if you need one, please ask after this. We have a handful left, right?
Yeah.
So, and may get more, I don't know.
Yeah, probably at the end of the year.
Some of these things are difficult to have in your kit, okay? Medications, it's tough to get an extra 30-day supply of medication just to put in kit, just in case. But it's something to consider, you know, maybe skip a pill every week or so and put it aside, I don't know. Personal ID, it's tough to have an extra one of those. But if you make a photocopy or scan it, excuse me, and have that in your kit, that could at least function for you in an emergency. So, I talked about this one too, a list of phone numbers. And here's why. If the power's out and you can't recharge your phone, do you have all the numbers in your phone memorized? Likely not. I just had somebody ask me for somebody's phone number that I should have known the other day. I don't know, it's in my phone, so I don't care what it is. Well, in an emergency, you're gonna care. Okay, this is really for the stay-at-home kit. 1 gallon of water per person per day for your household. That could be a lot of water. And we're talking 7 to 10 days. So think about that. You gotta have some place to store it and a means to store it. Change of clothing, which is seasonal. Blankets and sleeping bags work great. And I'll talk about some of these other items here in more detail, much more detail. And in fact, A lot of this stuff is on the handout that I gave you guys. If you want to make notes or add things to it, please do. Excuse me. My allergies were getting the better of me earlier this week, so. All right. Again, water, and here's why. 2 quarts for drinking, 2 quarts for food, and sanitation. Now, if you know you drink more water than that on a daily basis, account for that, okay? Don't use containers that degrade. Milk containers don't work well for this, but like soda bottles will, thicker plastic does. Don't use glass because it breaks. So just try to use things for water storage that are going to hold up. And replace it. All right, food. There are a lot of options out there for food, a lot of camping type food. If you go to Cabela's or Bass Pro, they have a pretty wide selection. I think even, you know, box stores like Walmart and Target are starting to carry things like that as well. Ready to eat, I'm in the military, so the meals that we get, MREs, meals ready to eat, those are typically good for 5 years. So they can be a little pricey, but they have a lot of calories, about 3,000 calories per meal, and they last for a long time. So it's a good option, maybe a little expensive. A lot of canned things, get your staples in there because you don't want to eat bland food for days on end. At least I don't want to. High energy stuff that's going to keep you going. And think about if you have infants in your house, or elderly people, or people on special diets. And yeah, throw in some good stuff, some cookies or something like that to kind of take the edge off. What are you going to want to prepare this food? Just some ideas here. Sterno works great. You can use that inside. If you have a little propane stove or something for camping, that's great too. Just be careful about using things like that inside due to the carbon monoxide problems that could come with that. Ziploc bags are on the kitchen accessories, but they can come in handy for other things, storing clothing to keep it dry, things like that. Tools, pencil and paper. Why? Well, your phone might not be working, your email might not be working. You may have to communicate something to someone and not have that option. So just some other things to think about. Plastic sheeting, that has to do going back to the clean air. If there's an incident that there's something in the air, such as a nuclear incident out at a power plant, you're going to want to close off your house as much as possible. That's where the plastic sheeting can come in. That's also useful in very cold weather. If house might be a little drafty, think about using that to seal off your doors and windows, particularly if you're out of power. Some of the sanitation hygiene items. If you're without power or water, it may get unpleasant, okay, to put it nicely. So that's kind of where this comes in. You know, we're not always going to have an emergency the ability to take care of waste like we normally do. So, you know, think about that ahead of time and don't get stuck having to go some other way that isn't going to be so nice. Yes, ma'am.
Question. I thought that you can use the toilet when things aren't going so well, but if it's all like the structure's all down, you can't. Because I thought like you
Well,
can just pour water in and it will flush or something like that, or that's not the case.
I'll give you, you might be able to do that, but for instance, this may not be a good example. I live in the township and I have a well.
Mhm.
And my well pump runs on electricity. So if the power's out, I'm not getting any water in it,
Right, right.
no matter what I do. So I may have to go to that backup water supply to help with that. But how important is that compared to drinking or making food?
Yeah, I'm just asking because I remember being down in the islands, like USVI,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things they did, because it's an island, a lot of the indigenous, whatever you want to say, people down there, just like flush once a day, you know, cover
Sure.
and flush once a day to conserve that water, because you're on an island. It's not like here.
Right.
And if you have the well system, would that still work if you pour down? I'm just asking.
The flushing would, yes.
The flushing would.
But
The
I guess my
sewage-
question is, where do you get the water from to do that?
Because you've taken potable water and are doing that.
Right,
You know what I mean?
yes.
You know, like some people like me, when they think something's coming, they start filling up big stuff. You know what I mean? Okay, this is drinkable, this is cookable, this is not for anything but sanitation, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing.
No, that's
my mentality.
good
It's like
idea.
empty paint buckets, who cares?
Have
You know?
that
5 gallons or
separated out.
five, you know,
Yeah.
who cares, you know? You know, to stock up on something. I'm just curious,
No.
you know, because I know that that's what they used to do down there. They used to just one flush a day, you know, you save and you conserve your water,
Sure,
you know, in places like that. You know, you don't blow dry your hair, you know, on certain islands and stuff because of the shortage. I'm dealing with a
Mhm.
lot of people like in Asia right now. They're like, we can't run the air conditioner. We have to conserve our electricity.
no, that's a good point, and that's sort of the improvising, so,
I mean, given that it's not earthquake, I mean, you don't have anything to work with then, but I'm
Right.
just saying
depends
like.
on the situation, for
Okay.
sure. Good point. Don't forget about your important documents. I have a little fireproof safe, fireproof, waterproof, so that can be useful. It's a little heavy, so, think about these things though, your insurance documents, medical, passports, ID, if you can put that in there, but think about it. Make some copies if you need to. All right, first aid. This is probably something you might want to buy a kit, unless you're a former EMT or something like that. So, like I said, I didn't come up with this list. I stole it from somebody. Plagiarism is the highest form of flattery, right? But like first aid kits, things like that, you can get pretty cheaply, and have those already assembled with the right stuff. Be sure to go check them every once in a while though, because things go bad in those as well. Don't forget your pets, and I know a lot of people won't forget their pets. In fact, they won't leave if ordered to evacuate if they can't take their pets. Won't go to a shelter if they can't take their pets, because they're family members. I've had pets, and yeah, it's tough. But think about them in your emergency kit as well. Their food, their water, their needs, their bedding needs, all that stuff. Medications. So have a photo of your pet too in your emergency kit, because if something happens and your dog is outside, somebody may find him, and you know, okay, here's a picture of Fido. So yep, that's him. Your dog is probably going to, if your dog sees you or your pet sees you, is probably going to react to you. So, but you never know. Have that as well. Okay. So now we get into the planning part of it. How are you going to communicate? Well, most everybody has a smartphone, right? And has all the information. So like I said before, be careful about having some of that information available outside of your phone in case the power's down. Now, most cell towers have a backup generator on them, so they may still function. However, in an emergency, many times they're overloaded with traffic. So the key is to not make phone calls, but text. And if you don't know how to text, learn to text. It takes up very little bandwidth compared to a telephone call and will likely get through. So consider that when coming up with a communication plan on who you're going to communicate with and how. Where are you going to meet? Okay, when during the day, I go into the city and my wife goes down to Bourbonnais, and our grandson who's living with us goes to Balmoral Elementary School. So, where are we going to meet if something happens? Are we going to come back home or something else? Just talk that over with the people, your family, people who live with you. How's this going to work out? Where are we going to meet? What if you're here and I'm there? Or do you just say, okay, we're going to meet at this particular intersection? Have a plan for that. What about your utilities? Do you know how to turn off your gas, your electric, your water? Propane. Anybody have propane in here? Need anything? Do you know how to turn that off? Those are things you need to know how to do. Are you going to evacuate? Well, you may be forced to evacuate. But what happens when it takes you, 2 hours to go half a mile? Are you prepared for that? And by that it means maybe think about having some extra fuel on hand for your vehicle, or try to keep your vehicle, half a tank of gas or more. Because you never know when 6 million people say something happens up, in Skokie. Well, people aren't going to go north out of the city; they're going to come south. So where are we? Right in the path of millions of people trying to leave the city. And again, think about your pets. All right, here's some good myths I found. Not true. Okay? First of all, they're probably going to be overwhelmed. 911 will be overwhelmed with calls, so you may not even get through. But in an emergency situation, there are going to be certain priorities for agencies who do respond to 911 calls. And the tree that fell on your house might not be that emergency. There may be worse things going on. So don't always rely on that. This is all I need, right? Kid with a little food, water, a radio, and a flashlight. No, there's a lot more that goes into it. There really is. So please consider that. That's likely not true, particularly if we start talking about flooding, unless you live in a floodplain and are flooded by the waterway. Otherwise, a flooded basement isn't going to, probably won't be taken care of by your insurance. Depends on your policy. Okay, I'll give them some of this one. It can get pricey depending on how you do it. But there are ways to build a kit relatively inexpensively. Every time you go shopping, buy one extra can of something, add it to your kit. Empty that 2-liter soda bottle. You don't have to go buy a new bottle. Fill that with water. So it'll take time, but it's not really that much more expensive. When you start adding that food, once you're 6 months down the line, well, maybe buy 2 cans of food, replace one, and then add the second one. Take that one you're replacing and use it. So buy something you're going to eat anyway. Don't buy something you said, well, I'll only eat that in an emergency. It's not complicated. There's a lot of information out there for you. Nothing like that could happen, right? Well, you never know what could happen, where it could happen. People say that all the time. This is the Midwest. I grew up in the Midwest. We have tornadoes. I've been fortunate here in this area for a long time. This is the second one I'll do. It is taught in school, actually. There are a lot of emergency management college courses now, so, but in primary school, high school, junior high, I don't think so, but it's still important. And I thought about this one. I thought nobody's gonna come out, they're gonna think this is some kind of prepper class, right? But it's not extreme, it's a smart thing to do. It makes the community better overall. Finally, that's not true, okay? And I can say that because I'm a volunteer who's volunteering to help if something bad happens. And you gotta think that your neighbors would be too. When bad things happen, in fact, a lot of times, way too many people show up to try to help. Washington, Illinois, for instance, last fall, they had far too many people showing up with way too much stuff to help them out with, and had to turn away. Because people do want to help when things go bad. All right, that's sort of the end of the prep class, but I want to cover a couple of other things. First, the Village of Crete will have a community emergency response team training, which is a 2-day class, and it's 2 Saturdays in a row, the end of October, beginning in November. There's some brochures in the back here, I think, and a sign-up sheet if you want to sign up. Where's that going to be, Marty? Right here. Right here. So, do you want to talk about a little what the
It prepares you to be prepared for emergencies that you can take care of on yourself at your own home. We're not gonna call you out and say, we need you to come up here and manage this incident or anything like that. It's to help you get maybe you and your neighbors back on track and getting yourself ready to go in an emergency, what you need to do in that. So we want you to be prepared to help take care of yourself and your neighbors.
Right. It's much more than just getting a kit together, okay? I know I looked through the class list, and I think there's some things about psychology in it, maybe, maybe not.
Disaster preparedness, fire safety and utility control, disaster medical operations, light search and rescue operations, disaster psychology, and terrorism and CERT.
So, let's sign up for that. It's free, so please come out. Part of the reason for doing this class is the village is now storm ready certified. That happened this afternoon by the National Weather Service. So we'll be getting some signs out somewhere in the village that say this is a storm ready community. So part of that though is having trained weather spotters, and that's going out and knowing how to identify a storm, and in particular a tornado, really, if it looks like a tornado is forming. So we'll probably do that sometime around February or March, and I anticipate being the instructor for that. And also, as part of the Storm Ready, keeping our certification, we have to provide trainings like this. So we're looking at having future subject matter of severe weather. It's really going to be weather focused because it's for the Storm Ready. Severe weather kind of training, not as intense as the weather spotter training, but looking at thunderstorms, hail, tornadoes, winter weather preparedness, things like that. So those are some things that we'll have in the future. And resources, and these are on those sheets that I gave out to you. There are a lot of resources out on the internet. If you just Google, which is one of my favorite sites for, that's how I learn most anything is through my good friend Google. Just Google emergency preparedness, and there's so much stuff out there. So please research it. And that's all I have. Questions from anyone? Yes.
I was putting together a kit and all that, you know, and just kept doing that. But, you know, after 6 months, you're looking at all that water, look at all that food, what do you do when you have all that after 6 months? I mean, do you like as a family get together and say, okay, we're gonna have a little emergency EMA party here, and we're gonna eat all this stuff up over a certain period of time, and then we're restocking, you
Well,
know?
no, you
I mean,
can cycle through it. As you put new food in, you can take
I know,
one of
but,
the first
okay,
ones
let's
out.
just say water. I have that amount of water, 7
Yes.
days worth and everything like that. I have water bottles, I have 5-gallon jugs, and I have a little Sandy water, right? I know I can dump my Sandy water with the plants or whatever.
Right.
But as far as the bottled water and then the 5 gallons and stuff like that, after 6 months, I mean, do you stagger that? Do you understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yes,
Do you
I would
stagger
stagger
that like
that
a
as well.
7?
And, you know,
And
does
then-
water really go bad? Well, not, I don't think it does.
It
Okay, but
does.
what about MRE, right? Right, like isn't that what they call it?
Yeah,
Okay, MRE. So you're there and you have your
you don't
family
want,
and.
you don't wanna eat that. You really don't.
Exactly. So what are you doing with that after 6 months? I mean, donating to the
No, those are good
food
for,
things,
that,
you know?
for instance, those are good for 5 years typically, so. It really depends on the expiration of your food.
Okay.
The water is a tougher situation. you know.
Okay, then my last
Yeah, water your
question-
plants, make coffee with it, I don't know.
Okay, my last question is this. I thought about this earthquake because I felt an earthquake, I think it was like 2011 or something. It was maybe around the Peoria area or something. But I felt it and I was like, whoa. I was in DuPage. And I'm like, wow, I just felt an earthquake. And then I like went on and I'm like, okay, it did happen.
Yeah,
But my whole deal is if you go ahead and get the fire safety and you have all these things in store, it doesn't really matter if you have an earthquake because everything is, you know, shaken. You know?
maybe,
Okay.
yeah. Here, we're not really on a fault or in a zone. What this area is gonna be affected by is getting, is broken gas lines, is transportation of food and other goods and fuel into the area.
Okay.
That's what we're gonna be dealing with more likely than the actual crumbling buildings of, you know, of what you think about in an earthquake. We're gonna experience more of the second order effects of that, where I-70, you know, bridges came down all the way across I-70, you know, between Indianapolis and, you know,
Okay, we're 50 miles away from a power plant. And
yes.
if it happens over there, okay, for example, it's in Russia, and the deal about them after Chernobyl, they keep their kids in. When I looked at all the information about Japan, they just like stay indoors,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's still the same policy, right?
For a certain period of time, yes,
Mhm.
shelter in place.
Oh, they never forgot. I mean, it's like you don't. I mean, it's sort of like it's the ghetto with no boom boxes, no like vegetation, and no kids running around. It's like, oh my gosh, it's just. It has that death thing, you know. You
Yeah.
drive through and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a whole agrarian area that is just totally shut down. Nothing is growing. People don't live here anymore. It's barren. I'm like, wow, this is deep, you know. And so the philosophy of a lot of people is they don't let their kids, you don't see them running around. I think a huge section of the population just died. You know, that's just, their kids were out doing a parade for May Day, seriously, and the fallout came and the government knew that, but they still let those kids out and they died. So a lot of people have this whole enclosed thing.
Yes, I would hope the Nuclear
government
Regulatory Committee, or,
Commission?
commission, would do better than that for us.
So it's still the same policy though, you stay indoors,
It depends, really, it's up to the governor. The governor's gonna
really?
make a call
Okay.
on shelter in place or evacuate.
Nothing can go wrong there.
Funny.
Yes,
Can
ma'am.
we go back and talk about the water? You said about putting water in bottles and
Absolutely.
top bottle, but doesn't it, is there a certain way to store it? I thought you were supposed to keep it in the dark, and keep it indefinitely.
It should be in the, right, away from light,
Okay.
but, recommendation is to change it out every 6 months. What's that?
I'd rather think mine's been down there for like 2 years.
Go taste it and see.
If it's store-bought water, it can last up to 2 years. If it's tap water that you're bottling, 6 months.
Oh, no, just like actual, like
Yeah,
whatever, Ice Mountain or
yeah,
whatever it is.
it's up to 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's older than that, it does, believe it or not, bottled water that you buy in the store, it does have an expiration date. The water, the concern there is the degradation of the plastic over time. Leaches into the bottled water and can contaminate the water, and so that's what your concern
I know they were
is.
saying that with like sunlight, so that's why you keep it out of the light, but I
Correct,
didn't realize even
correct.
in the dark.
Yeah, it will break down over time.
Eventually, yeah.
You know, it's really interesting to watch what's happening right now over in eastern Ukraine. Those people were living in an Eastern European prosperous nation that just went south in a hurry. And the number one complaint is there's no water.
Mhm.
And so it's just several different ways. It's just a tragedy. But I am sure that they would have wanted to have this planning 2 years ago to think about the worst case scenario. Now, in our area, I have a question with regard to our wells, our water towers. I'm sure that we have backup generators at each of the wells, correct? Is that safe to assume?
Are you talking about like in the village?
Yeah, in the village.
Like a community well have a backup generator?
Our main source of water for the village of Crete, do we have backup generators for that scenario where the power goes out for extended?
I don't know the answer to that. Somebody else may.
I'm no expert on it, but no, all of our wells do not have. You have to understand how wells work. The generator actually pumps the water out of the well and stores it up in the tower. Tower is what gives us the gravity that pushes it throughout the system to our homes and that. So the generator would be needed to pump the water out of the well into the tower. Now each tower holds, and I don't know the amount of water that they hold, but several days worth of storage throughout our whole network here in the village of Crete, our system. So we would have that. We have a portable generator that we're able to take to different well sites and run that generator to replenish the system again. So we don't need to replenish we don't have to have a generator running at every well site. I guess is the point I'm trying to make. We have enough reserve, and then we have a generator we can put out there to start to refill the system back up again. Your usage is usually generally higher during the daytime. At night it's down, so you can replenish it at the lower use hours.
You mentioned the rail going through town, and I'm sure that they've thought about that many times. Do we have any kind of a written disaster plan for, the great what if? How do you handle that situation? I'm sure the fire department has something, but some type of response.
You wanna
The
talk to
village is
that,
actually,
Steve?
yeah, the village is actually in the process of updating our emergency operation
Yeah.
plan currently. We have a plan that's old, but we are in the process of updating it right now. Hope to have it done in the next few months.
It will cover all hazards.
Mhm.
It's not, and there will be specific annexes for things like toxic, chemical or material release, but. yeah.
Right, and all those things are dependent upon
And
weather.
The weather plan
Right.
is
Yeah.
part of it as well.
Right, the weather plan,
Shelter
fire
plan.
department has an emergency hazmat response plan for those types of incidents and so forth, correct?
And most of the plans cross over what you do in an emergency. You handle things in similar methods, so you don't have to have an exact breakdown for every type of possible hazard that we could encounter. So you'd be able to, one plan covers a lot of different hazards, as you would say.
Right, so to be clear, the village does have an emergency response plan. The fire department does have plans to respond to hazardous material incidents, which, should there be a rail event, it's not only Crete's fire department responding to that particular incident, you also have the other surrounding fire departments, as you're familiar with,
Assets,
as,
right.
formerly being engaged with the Crete Fire Department as a fireman and so forth. You know what the MABUS and so forth. So you've got that response taking place, so all the other fire departments coming in, or Crete also responding to assist other fire departments should that the derailment occur in that surrounding community. They're also, Crete would be responding to that event as well. So there is a plan to deal with those particular events. So to Marty's point, we're in the process of updating the village's emergency response plan.
One
We
last,
also just did a tabletop exercise back in June with a derailment of a chemical exposure was one that we actually drilled on with
Correct.
the village-wide, so we had the county in and stuff like that to assist us, so it's something that we practice and try to be prepared for.
being involved in FEMA and being a part of the United States Army, I've noticed lately that Homeland Security, NASA, NSA, they all seem to be hyping up the emergency preparedness for individuals for that big what-if scenario. And NASA they did a little YouTube on it, and they seem to be suggesting that the number one, critical threat to large populated areas was, the mass evacuation. Something happens and that many people have to leave or services are gone. And they gave some of the examples: EMP, something that would knock out all, communications technology, and then the other was the solar flare, the mass ejection that would, have the same effect. So you being in that capacity at that level of training, how critically do you look at those things? I mean, what are the capabilities out there now that could actually cause that event that you're aware of? Don't worry about it much?
No,
Yeah.
not really. I work with FEMA as a liaison between the Department of Defense and that agency. And we don't really get into that level of what if. Our responsibility is to provide that link to military resources in a response, particularly a lot of logistics that goes into a response, moving things and people, not so much the actual plans themselves. So, yeah, I'm not too worried about solar flares personally, but it keeps NASA in business, right? So, all right, anyone else? Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
And please visit the back table for some materials, and again, the CERT training in October, November is a good opportunity. The EMA is sponsoring it and training it, I guess, right?
Yeah, partially trained.
A couple of guys will be here to train that. So, thank you.